will travel far, my little Kalel, but we will never leave you, even in the face of our death. You will make my strength your own. You will see my life through your eyes, as your life will be seen through mine. The son becomes the father, and the father the son.
The cradle of symbolism used in all masonry is placed by many of the best authorities in that country which they believe was first inhabited, i.e. the plateau of Tartary, and from there transmitted to this generation by the sages of India, Persia, Ethiopia, and Egypt. We are not indebted to either ancient Egypt for either religion or masonry, but to America. It is a fact that at Memphis, Egypt, in the pyramids, under the guidance of the kings, the mystic rites of masonry were worked many thousands of years ago. But at that time, Egypt and the continent of America were one and the same. In America, rediscovered in the 15th century and repopulated in the 17th, was recovered Egypt and the promised land, or land of the constellation of the eagle. Study of the American constellations Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricornus reveals the immemorial antiquity of the name America and the significance of the arms of the United States. The fact once recognized that it is impossible to separate the eagle from America, the land shadowed with wings of Isaiah, over which accordingly appear two grand eagles. The red swan flying down the Milky Way, and the winged steeds Pegasus and Equus, all the wings known to astronomy. Without taking the bear from Russia, Perseus from Persia, and a flood of light is poured upon the history and mythology, and where heretofore much has been vague and inscrutable, now we are able to at least see men as trees walking. When following the course of the constellations, those immovably and perpetually fastened upon America are reached, it will appear, while all that is sublime in the historic past centers upon Egypt, all that is sublime in the prehistoric past centers upon America. Atlantis, as the curtain which has hitherto concealed the prehistoric connection between the peoples of ancient Egypt and America, is lifted. It will be seen that the people of the eagle on the Nile, being descended from the original people of the eagle on this continent, the twain are one, and that prehistoric America was the original Egypt, or Eagle Land, prior to the mighty dispensation in the days of Peleg, when the earth was divided and the great globe itself was nearly rent asunder. End quote. Quote, says Agassiz, first born among continents, America has been falsely denominated the New World. Hers was the first dry land lifted out of the waters. Hers was the first shore washed by the ocean that enveloped all the earth besides, while Europe was represented only by islands. Rising here and there above the sea, America, Atlantis, already stretched in an unbroken line from Nova Scotia to the far west.
Historically, replication was a traditional part of Buddhist practice and a way of earning karmic merit. And opposed to Western attitudes, copying in China was a way to master Chinese painting.
But what if the truth of our diverse pasts were all related to one true core? What if the questions that we all asked had one answer based in fact? Would this undermine the belief systems of the globe? In truth, there is one definite thing we know about the religions of the world. They have all, at one time or another, been used as tools of manipulating mankind into action, or indeed inaction. They've all been used to maintain and grow massive power bases that today appear unbreakable. They've all been used to increase the coffers of those in positions of authority. The priests create a value called God, and add to that, it is added value. Look at it this way, a diamond is a lump of crystallized rock. The world is full of them, and yet somehow we have added value to it, and now it is precious to us. It is actually of no worth other than what humans place on it, and has no spiritual or practical value, and the animals would walk past it without care. It cannot feed you, it cannot save you, and it certainly ought not to make you any happier than you already should be. And yet, people kill each other for them, based upon the value created by another man. An artist puts paint on canvas and adds value. He is colouring up the mundane and charging us for it. Will it feed us? Will it save the starving of Africa? Or stop the brutal murder of innocents? I think not. All of this is what Islam calls the kafir system. It is the unseen force that is behind many evils and is led by the Dajjal, the Antichrist. So even the very dark side of religion is given extra value. In this way, the system is actually at odds with what it is supposed to do. It is paradoxical and yet self-sustaining. Society is run on this system. But ask yourself, what does this system care for justice, love, need? It is, like the tale of that little girl in the cathedral, feeding off the desires of man and at the same time subjugating him. It is adding value to the inner spiritual nature of man with a lie. The truth is that we have a spiritual nature brought about by our own consciousness and desire to understand the big questions. We have emotions, empathy and feelings about the world, people and animals around us. We look towards the heavens in wonder, and then along comes a man in a religious frock and gives us explanations, and all he asks in return for access to this wonderful new world of peace, harmony and heaven is 10% of your earnings. Not for him, you understand, but for the gods. Today there are many lies and much deception. They are not always so obvious, and in fact the majority are subtle, but they always tend to offer us something which most of the time we could have done without or found within ourselves. A lifetime of such deception turns a man dark. It weighs him down with fear, guilt, desire, lust, and in the end he forgets what he really wanted and needed in the first place. He is consumed by other people's ideas of what he should be. Only by understanding that these things are false, that he did not need to pay for the priest in the first place, that he did not need the diamond ring or painting, will he free himself from the cycle of debt. But more importantly, he will free his mind of the false desires and understand his true self. It is this freeing of the mind with the knowledge of our and other people's deceptions that is the root to true enlightenment. This is the real reason that the Catholic Church and other authorities tried to stamp out dissent. If we look back in time to those organisations that orthodoxy tried to eradicate, we find one truth at the core, that those who would be free were gatherers of knowledge. One only has to look at the wonderful tales of the Egyptian city, Alexandria, with its millions of books and scrolls encompassing the wisdom and knowledge of the world in the ages past. It was burned to the ground by Christianity, afraid of the power of knowledge. It is time to free ourselves of the bonds of ignorance. These truths may well be covered in glorious tales of magical wonder and hidden beneath coded green languages, but it will be a truth that explains how they survived. This does not mean that what we uncover will not be exciting. It just means it will be real. The journey upon which we are about to embark will be rough for some because previous perceptions and belief systems will be challenged, and I would have it no other way. Often, these new interpretations of our past will be ignored or sidelined because of the reader's current religious perception. However, I say to those people, try to understand that just because you are told a certain thing does not mean it is true. In all my research over the past few years, one little animal, both physical and metaphysical, has kept cropping up: the snake or serpent. There are literally thousands of interpretations given to the symbolism of the snake that we find in ancient texts, artworks, sculptures and structures, and yet they can all be traced to one root source. The following information may sound a little like an encyclopedia. However, the information is vital to any serious investigator of our religious and cultural past. In short, I have discovered that a correct understanding of our own history cannot be fully comprehended without a firm knowledge of the worship of the serpent. In the first place, we should understand that the snake is the physical, slithering creature we see around the world, whereas the serpent is the mystical, mythological, and metaphysical aspect of the same thing. To begin, we should also understand the root of the word and other related words that give us the various terms around the globe for serpent or snake. The snake is known in the language of Canaan variously as Orb, Ab, Ob, Ob, Off and Op, F and Ev. Amazingly, in the Mayan language, Can, from Canaan, means serpent, as in Kukulkan, the serpent bird. And just as in the ancient Sumerian Akan and the Scottish Can for serpent, which is where we get the word canny, like the wise snake, Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, comes from the Babylonian Can for serpent and Vul for fire, showing an etymological link across thousands of miles. Indeed, even the very centre of the Christian world, the Vatican, comes from the words Vatis for prophet and Can for serpent, making the Vatican a place of serpent prophecy. The oracle that the biblical King Saul appealed to for prophecy was called One That Hath Ob, or the priestess of Ob, the snake. The snake worshippers of Moses' time and area were known as Hivites, derived from Hivia, or serpent, the root of Eve. Hivites became Ophites, the early Christian Gnostic serpent worshippers who claimed affinity with the Christians in the 2nd century AD. Indeed, the very children of Israel intermarried with them and served their gods. They were also known as Baalim, from Baal or Bel. Baal was a solar god, thought by John Bathurst Dean in his Worship of the Serpent traced throughout the world to be an abbreviation of Ob-El, the serpent god or shining serpent.
Casey on Atlantis by Edgar Evans Casey. Reading given in 1932. The position the continent of Atlantis occupied is between the Gulf of Mexico on the one hand and the Mediterranean upon the other. Evidence of this lost civilization are to be found in the Pyrenees and Morocco, British Honduras, Yucatan, and America. There are some protruding portions that must have at one time or other been a portion of this great continent. The British West Indies or the Bahamas are a portion of the same that may be in the present. If the geological survey would be made, and some of these especially or notably in Bimini and in the Gulf Stream, through this vicinity, these may be even yet determined. Describe the Earth's surface at the period of the appearance of the 5 projections. This has been given, and the first, or that known as the beginning, or in the Caucasian and Cappadocia, or the Garden of Eden, and that land which lies now much in the desert, yet much in the mountain and much in the rolling lands there. The extreme northern portions were then the southern portions, or the polar regions were then turned to where they occupied more the tropical and semi-tropical regions. Hence, it would be hard to describe the change that now entered into the Atlantic Ocean fertile. What is now the central portion of this country, or the Mississippi Basin, was then all in the ocean. Only the plateau of existence, or the regions that are now portions of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona form the greater portions of what we know as the United States, that along the Atlantic seaboard form the outer portion, then, or the lowland of Atlantis. The Andean, or the Pacific coast of South America, occupied then the extreme western portion of Lemuria. The Urals and the northern regions of same were turned into a tropical land. The desert in the Mongolian land was then the fertile portion. This may enable you to form some concept of status of the Earth's representations at that time. The oceans were then turned about. They no longer bear their name, yet from whence obtained they their names. What is the legend even as to their names?
The Diluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly. This was from New York, Harper & Brothers, Franklin Square in 1882. That Atlantis was the region where man first rose from a state of barbarism to civilization. We can trace corn way back 10,000 years. Also, point 4, he says that it became in the course of ages a populous and mighty nation, from whose overflowing the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, the Amazon, the Pacific coast of South America, all the way to the Pacific coast of South America. And what's there? Peru, right? The Mediterranean, the west coast of Europe and Africa, the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the Caspian were populated by civilized nations. That the gods, the goddesses of the ancient Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Hindus, and the Scandinavians were simply the kings, queens, and heroes of Atlantis. Alright, hijacked from the indigenous people of America. All these gods, right, they talk about. Where did they originate? And the acts attributed to them in mythology are confused recollection of real historical events. That the mythology of Egypt and Peru represent the original religion of Atlantis, which was sun worship according to them, right? And there was sun worship by some of the tribes that were in America. Point 8, that the oldest colony formed by the Atlanteans was probably in Egypt, whose civilization was a reproduction of that of the Atlantic island. So it says that from America, Atlantis, right, they went over to Egypt that we know today and colonized it there, and that's a colony of Atlantis, not the Egypt. Alright, not the original Egypt. That the implements of the Bronze Age of Europe were derived from Atlantis. And if you know about the Michigan mines, you'll see that a lot of the Bronze Age metal that the Greeks and Romans used was coming from America, being mined up there. You can research that. Alright, and it continues, says the Atlanteans were also the first manufacturers of iron. Point 10, that the Phoenician alphabet, parent of all European alphabets, was derived from an Atlantis alphabet, which was also conveyed from Atlantis to the Mayas of Central America. Those parts of America over which it ruled were, as we will show thereafter, Central America, Peru, and the valley of the Mississippi, occupied by the mound builders. Alright? Moreover, he tells us that this vast power was gathered into one. That is to say, from Egypt to Peru, it was one consolidated empire. We will see hereafter that the legends of the Hindus as the Diva Nahusha distinctly referred to this vast empire which covered the whole of the known world.
As I go through the research, I find certain things ringing bells with me. I'm working in the Mississippi Valley. I'm at Moundville in Alabama, and I'm looking at a notice board. It's just the beginning of my research into this interesting culture in the Mississippi Valley. And the notice board has been put up by the site, and they're telling us about the site. And what they say is that the whole site was about afterlife beliefs, and that it was believed that on death, the soul of the deceased would ascend to the constellation of Orion, and then would pass through the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, and then would make a journey along the Milky Way, where it would face trials and tribulations and be judged on its behavior during life. The weird thing is, that's exactly the ancient Egyptian system of religion. It's exactly the system. It's too detailed to be a coincidence. What is that narrow star shaft in the Great Pyramid doing, if not pointing at the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt? To send the soul of the deceased up to Orion, then indeed a journey along the Milky Way, trials and tribulations, and a judgment. The same story exactly. But how do we explain that? Can it be a coincidence? No, I don't think so. Details are far too complicated.
In the Atlantean land, during those periods when there were the encasements and indulgences of many that had put on matter or material bodies. In that now known as Atlantean land, during those periods when the first of the sons of men coming for the expression into matter, and then it took upon itself the activities and brought destructive forces with those reactions during the experience when there were again and again expressions of the sons of God coming into their manifestations and the earth through taking on the form of the flesh in that experience. In Atlantean land, when one individual first saw the changes that eventually made for the opening for the needs of or the preparation for the universal consciousness as the first created man, an advisor to those who would change their forms of activities or the attempts to later express as being rid of the appendages of materiality. In the days when the sons of God came together to reason in the elements as to the appearance of man in the physical on earth's plane, and this entity was among those chosen as the messenger to all the realm. I would interpret the readings just quoted to mean that the thought forms who once could move freely in a non-material world or a different kind of world than is experienced by our 5 senses had projected themselves into material bodies. Once they had done this, they were able to experience material sensations, heat, cold, pleasure, pain, etc. However, the more they sought sensual pleasure through the gratification of selfish desires, the less able they became to move freely in and out of their material bodies. They became encased in them from birth to death, and thus subject to all the laws of the physical universe. Evidently, they continued to enjoy their material sojourn and began to exploit the physical world and pattern it for their own pleasure and diversion. But with these transpositions, with these changes that came in as personalities, we find the sons of the creative force looking upon those changed forms, or the daughters of men, and there crept in those pollutions and polluting themselves with those mixtures that brought contempt, hatred, bloodshed, and desires of self without respect of others' freedoms, other wishes. And there began then, in the latter portion of this period, dissentings and divisions among the peoples in the lands. In that land known as the Upper Atlantean, during those periods when there was the entering of many that took bodily form for the dispersing of the thoughts given by the lords of the land, entity used rather as the experiment and associations with the various conditions. In the Atlantean land, when there were the first periods of attempting to use the creative forces for the separating of the influences and the activities that had come about by the thought form and the activities of the creative forces of the Lord One. In Atlantean land, during the period not of second destruction but of early upheavals and activities of varied groups that were a part of the evolution of bodies and minds, and of others that were a part of the idea of evolution for conveniences, for the settling of judgments, and for drudges in the activities. The following quotation refers to psychic communication with man's higher nature. In Atlantis, a priestess, keeper of the white stone, or thought through which many of the peoples, before the first destruction of Atlantis, kept their accord with the universal consciousness through speaking to and through those activities. However, as they became more enmeshed in materiality through self-indulgence, they began to lose sight of their true nature, their origin and spirit. The following quotation repeats a phrase referred to before and indicates the beginning of man's involvement with sex, an involvement which has given him trouble to this day. In Atlantean land, when there were those disturbing forces, or just previous to the first disturbing forces that brought the first destruction in the continent, through the application of spiritual beings for self-indulgence of material peoples. These were the periods as termed in the scripture when the sons of God looked upon the daughters of man and saw them as being fair. The next two quotations introduce two phrases, the sons of Belial and the sons of the Loved One, which occur repeatedly in the readings. They sound peculiar and awkward at first, but probably no more so than wigs and tories. Atlantean land during these periods, when there were the divisions between those of the Loved One and the sons of Belial, or the offspring of what was the pure race, and those who had projected themselves into creatures that became the sons of men, as the terminology would be, rather than the creatures of God. In Atlantean land, when there were the greater questionings between the sons of the Loved One and the sons of Belial, or between those that were purified by keeping the pure strain and those that were projections by thought, individuals, or beings. My interpretation of these statements is that some of the original spiritual creations or souls who had taken on materiality for their own diversion had in a sense become trapped in it. By misusing their creative powers and self-indulgence, they became subject to the laws of cause and effect, which include the laws of reincarnation and karma. These sons of Belial, as they were called in these readings, continued their selfish exploitation of the earth and its life forms until they lost sight of their true spiritual nature. This may be the real fallen man, a soul that has so separated itself from its maker by selfishness that even after death it cannot comprehend its own nature, but is drawn back into what it has created, is indeed in hell. However, some of these souls, the sons of the Loved One, realized their predact and attempted to create a vehicle man, through which it would be possible for souls to regain a comprehension of their creator. I believe these efforts culminated long after the destruction of Atlantis and Christ, who voluntarily took human form to show man the path home. A reading describing an early incarnation in Atlantis seems to affirm the idea of two divergent groups. There were also centers that were developing, for in the projections they began as many, and in creating influences they began as 5, or in those centers where crystallization or projection had taken on such forms as to become what was called man, though it hardly could be said that they were in the exact form as in the present. So in the following, or interpreting the Poseidon period, or in the Atlantis, let it be understood that this was only one of the groups, and the highest or the greater advancement in the earthly sojourning of individual entities or souls at the particular period. Further on, the same reading defines the sons of Belial as those who sought the gratifying, the satisfying, the use of material things for self without thought or consideration as to the sources of such, nor the hardships and experience of others, or in the other word, as we would term it today, they were those without a standard of morality. The sons of Belial had no standard, save of self-aggrandizement. In the opposition to the sons of Belial were the sons of the Loved One, those whose standard was that the soul was given by the Creator or entered from outside sources into the projection of the mental and spiritual self at the given periods. That was the standard of the Loved One, but was rejected by the sons of Belial. Sounds as if the spiritual beings who projected themselves into the earth's life forms had creative power themselves. Some misuse this creative power to reproduce grotesque life forms for their own purposes, interpreting their evolutionary pattern going on in the earth. This did not begin immediately. Several life readings refer to a period prior to this time. In Atlantean land, before there were the definite separations of the children of the Loved One and the children of Belial. In Atlantean land, during those periods of early rise of sons of Belial as oppositions that became more and more materialized as the powers were applied for self and bringing servitude to many through the aggrandizing of those things that pertain to the gratification of material beings, material desires in the body. In Atlantean land, during periods when there were activities that brought about questionings that arose between the two great forces, the period before the first destruction of the land, among children of the Loved One who cared much about those things that were parts of the activity having been brought about by the great teacher and those experiences. Entity aided in helping get these to overcome when they became aware of the relationships of the individual entity to the universal consciousness of God, periods of progression. Entity lived to be 1,000 years old in years as termed today. So many changes in the earth and in the way in which preparations were made for the advent of the souls of man to be brought to their relationship with God.
The shining aspect of the serpent reveals a subtle clue. On the one hand, the shining was the illumination believed to have been achieved when under altered states of consciousness, and wherein one sees serpents the world over. This is of course not true enlightenment, as our ancestors readily pointed out that true illumination derived from knowledge of one's own soul and knowledge of the greater works of the gods. This leads us to other knowledge, the stars. In literal truth, the serpent was indeed seen in the sky, which shone down upon us. This is why in Egypt, for instance, we will see the sun, or Aten, wrapped with the snake, and why the serpent was worldwide seen as a symbol of the sun. Getting back to Baal, we find that the 20th century writer and historian Bryant remarked that the Greeks called him Beliar, which was interpreted by Hesychius to mean a dragon or great serpent. Bel is the Assyrio-Babylonian version of the gods Enlil and Marduk, being the same as Baal, the same Baal seen throughout the Bible. So the Baal in the Bible is a Babylonian serpent god. Could it be that Beltane should be rendered Beltan, both words signifying the dragon or serpent, and showing again a cross-continent link to the Europe? Remember that this was a time of year associated with the sun, and the serpent is again here being linked with the astro-theological concepts. In fact, Tanit was the patron goddess of Carthage in northern Africa, who was also associated with the tree of life like Ishtar and Astarte, and she definitely crossed cultures into Europe. Often the tree is depicted with wavy lines, said to represent serpents, emerging in symbolic form. The name Tanit means serpent lady, and she is found on many coins in Carthage, associated with the caduceus, and symbolising the role of Tanit in life, death and rebirth. She is basically the same as the Queen of Heaven, Astarte, Isis or Mary. Here the serpent is associated with the cycles of the moon as the Queen of Heaven, whereas the male serpent is the King of Heaven, the Sun, the one being the mirror to the other. This relates the early Christian Gnostics right back to Babylonian beliefs of serpent worship, which in turn goes across to Egypt and Mesopotamia in general towards the African ancient serpent cults. Christianity then is related to the most ancient serpent worship known, and if it were not for the destructive covering up of huge amounts of historical data by the Christians, then this would have been all the more obvious without such extreme measures of investigation. It is a fact that the Christians were ashamed of this link and did all they could to destroy it, not least because it would reveal their own deity to be the sun itself.
As with all secret societies, you have levels, and if you're on the lower levels, you don't even know they're upper levels. They don't even tell you. You bump into it by accident, or someone comes along. Now, in Scottish Rite, that's something different, because they know that there's a. But before then, basically, secret societies such as, let's go to ancient Egypt. To the ancient Egyptians, the priest would tell the serfs, the guys that tilled the land, they would say, the sun is God, okay? And so they accepted that very low-level interpretation, all physical. That's not what the priest believed. What the priest believed, there was a second level. The priest believed that, no, the physical sun is not the supreme being. It's the spirit which flows through the physical sun that is the supreme deity. However, there was another level, and the priests didn't even know it. It was those that were involved and elevated to if I would have told you this 15 years ago, I might have gotten shot.
And the Egyptian-Indian connection in some ways can actually be proven. Yet the link that ties these two seemingly distant and unalike cultures together are the ancient civilizations of America. The similarities between Maya and Hindu mythology are beyond uncanny. And there is no doubt that these two distant cultures are connected through the archives of antiquity. One of the most noticeable parallels is the veneration of the serpent in both cultures. But also even more concurrent is the fact that the serpent also played a major role in the mythology of ancient Egypt. In fact, the serpent depiction on the pharaonic headdress shows a direct connection between the two cultures of Egypt and India, as many Hindu deities are also shown as serpents. And of course, these figures are both reminiscent of Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, synonymous with the Mayan culture. According to Tamil linguists, the word Quetzalcoatl is actually a bastardized word in their language, meaning enemy of the eagle. The mythology surrounding the Nagas is intrinsically interwoven by the mysteries left behind from the ruins in Central America. In 1921, discovered the first of over 100 andesite tablets on a dig in San Miguel and Mala, Azcapotzalco, which was an important city-state conquered by the Aztec Triple Alliance in 1431. The area now forms part of northwestern Mexico City. The indecipherable markings on the tablets were subject of much controversy over the last years of Niven's life. The so-called Niven tablets have been surrounded by controversy since their discovery by Niven in 1921. They have been associated with Scandinavian petroglyphs as posited by Ludovic Mann, and they have been associated with lost continent theories. Their association with lost continent theories comes through James Churchward's interpretation of the symbols found on the tablets. James Churchward offered an interpretation of the tablets that has caused less belief in their authenticity. Churchward was a major proponent of theories regarding lost continents, specifically the continent of Mu, a continent often mentioned in esoteric texts of various cultures around the world. He believed that in the early history of the world, there existed a continent which was called Mu. This civilization, according to Churchward and many others, was technologically advanced, but was destroyed due to natural disaster. After viewing rubbings of Niven's tablets, Churchward strongly believed that there were a group of people that escaped destruction and migrated to other parts of the world, spreading their culture and belief system. He believed that the symbols and markings found on the tablets had roots in the ancient culture of Mu. Niven spent the good part of his life selling the tablets, trying to figure out their origin and meaning. This was never accomplished. The tablets were interpreted by many people, and many theories were posited, but to no avail. They were eventually lost during the latter part of Niven's life, during their attempted shipment from Mexico to the United States. They were lost crossing the Rio Grande. All right. So we can see here clearly that even if the find by Niven had been legitimate at the time, which there doesn't seem to be any speculation as to Niven making false findings. Most of the speculation around these tablets involves Churchward and his interpretation of these lost continents, specifically the continent of Mu. So again, as we can see, a pattern of preserving history on one side of the world, but destroying history in America. No matter how one may feel personally about Hindu mythology, one fact remains true until this day. Valmiki is the literal father of Hinduism and Buddhism. His 5th century epic, the Ramayana, is one of the most important Vedic texts in existence. In his own words written in Sanskrit, he asserts that Burma was the first civilization in Asia. Valmiki stated, quote, "The Maya, starting from the land of their birth in the east, went first to Burma and there taught the natives who became known as the people of the Nagas." So according to Valmiki, the people who first civilized this area came from the east. And what land is east of India? Archaeological finds in northern India, Thailand, and Cambodia directly support Valmiki's written records. The Nakal are contextually the same people as the Nagas, but Europeanized by James Churchward and Augustus Le Plongeon. Nakal is the name of an ancient people and civilization first claimed to have existed by Le Plongeon and Churchward. Augustus Le Plongeon's description of the Nakal. The first recorded use of the term Nakal is contained in Augustus Le Plongeon's work from 1896, Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx. The next known published use of the word occurred in 1926 when James Churchward used the term in his book, The Lost Continent of Mu, Motherland of Man. According to Churchward, the Nakal were the people and civilization of the lost continent of Mu, as well as the name of their language. According to Churchward, the population of the Nakal civilization was as high as 64 million. This civilization flourished 50,000 years ago, was technologically more advanced than the civilization of Churchward's own 19th and 20th century, and the ancient civilizations of India, Babylon, Persia, Egypt, and the Mayas were merely decayed remnants of Nakal colonies. So it wasn't really until after Churchward's lost continent of Mu theory then did these tablets start to fall in the realm of speculation. Churchward claims to have gained knowledge of the Nakals after befriending an Indian priest who taught him to read the ancient dead language of the Nakals, spoken by only 3 people in all of India. The priest disclosed the existence of several ancient tablets written by the Nakals, and Churchward gained access to these records after overcoming the priest's initial reluctance. His knowledge remained incomplete, as the available tablets were mere fragments of the larger text, but Churchward claimed to have found verification and further information in the records of other ancient peoples. So you can see here how Churchward takes something that is initially substantial and massages it into the world of speculation. Le Plongeon, most of his information could be corroborated with evidence that could be presented within his works. Churchward delved into an area that could no longer be proven. He claimed that Ra was the word which the Nakals used for sun, as well as their god and rulers.
We're back in the book Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx by Augustus Le Plongeon, the author of the Sacred Mysteries among the Mayas and the Quiches, and also a sketch of the ancient inhabitants of Peru and their civilizations, etc. All right. So chapter 1, it says Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx. Now it says here, in ages long lost in the abyss of time, when Aryan colonists had not yet established their first settlements on the banks of the river Saraswati in the Punjab, and the primitive Egyptian settlers in the valley of the Nile did not fancy. So they're telling you before any Hindu people or any people in Hindustan or anybody in the valley of the Nile or right there or the other side of Egypt or any Egyptian wherever Egypt was, they're saying that there was nobody there. There was not a fancy. Even their most hopeful daydreams that their descendants would become the great people whose civilization was to be the cradle of that of Europe. There existed on the western continent a nation, the Maya, that had attained to a high degree of culture in arts and sciences, alright? So before they could even daydream, alright? Before them, before the Hindus, before the Egyptians, there existed on the western continent the Mayas, alright? It says here Valmiki and his beautiful epic, the Ramayana, which is said to have served as a model to Homer's Iliad, alright, you see? So Homer's Iliad came from the Ramayana. It tells us that the Mayas were mighty navigators. Alright, so the Ramayana, alright, this is a Hindu book or epic or poem, alright? So we're in ancient history encyclopedia, just real quick so we can get a reference, right, of what we're talking about. So the Ramayana, ancient Indian epic, composed sometime in the 5th century BC. Alright, so they're saying it's supposedly more than 2,000 years old. Alright, about the exile and then return of Rama, Prince of Ayodhya. It was composed in Sanskrit by the sage Valmiki. Alright, we just heard that name, right? So Valmiki, who taught it to Rama's sons, the twins Lava and Kush. At about 24,000 verses, it is a rather long poem, and by tradition it is known as the Adi Kavya. Adi meaning original, and then first Kadiya or first poem. Alright, so it's very old writing. Alright, so we're also going to get into, he's going to reference the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata. Alright, what is this? And this says that the Mahabharata is an ancient Indian epic where the main story revolves around two branches of the family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, who in the Kurukshetra war battled for a throne of Hastinapura. Alright, interwoven into this narrative of several smaller stories about people dead or living and philosophical discourses. Listen to this, it says Krishna, Dawipayan, Vyasa. Alright, Krishna himself is the character in the epic, composed it as according to tradition. So they're giving Krishna, right, their god Krishna, I know you guys have heard of that, the credit for writing the Mahabharata, which we're going to see contain stories about the Mayas and how they were the architects. They built their cities, these Hindu cities long ago. Alright, so Krishna is letting us know. Alright, it says he dictated the verses and Ganesha wrote them down. So down here it says, including within it the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata is one of the most important texts of ancient Indian, indeed world literature. Very important. And then guess what? It has the Maya all over it. So let's go back to Queen Mu. Continue reading again. It said that Valmiki in his beautiful epic, the Ramayana, which is said to have served as model for Homer's Iliad, tells us that the Mayas were mighty navigators. Alright, you can go verify that. It's in there and I did. Whose ships traveled from the western to the eastern ocean, from the southern to the northern seas, in ages so remote that the sun had not yet risen above the horizon. That being likewise great warriors, they conquered the southern parts of Hindustani. Alright, that's what they call India today. It was called Hindustani. Alright, that whole peninsula, they conquered it, right, and established themselves there. That being also learned architects, alright, since they were also learned architects, Toltecs, Maya, alright, they built great cities and palaces. Alright, they're talking about what they did in Hindustan. These Mayas became known in after times under the names of Danavas, regarded by modern historians as aborigines of the country, or Nagas, as we shall see later on in Hindustani as the Nagas, the serpent people, the Amaru Khan, plum serpent. The knowledge, serpent means knowledge, it doesn't always mean something bad. Alright, so Danavas, alright, this just want to go to the footnotes, all right? Because we got a footnote here. They built great cities and palaces, and then we got number 2, all right? So let's go to the footnote real quick. Now it says, Valmiki in the Ramayana, and this is in volume 2, page 26. If you want to verify it, go ahead. This is an ancient text, remember, 2,000 years old. Epic Indian, alright? In olden time, it says, there was a prince of the Danavas, a learned magician, endowed with great power. His name was Maya. Alright, that's in the Ramayana. This is quoting it. We're quoting it right here. It was he who, by magic art, with his magic art, constructed this golden grotto. He was the Vikakarma, architect of the gods, this guy named Maya, of the principal Danavans. And this superb palace of solid gold is the work of his hands. Alright? Again, go verify that. That's in the Ramayana volume 2. Alright? Maya is mentioned in the Mahabharata as one of the 6 individuals. Alright? The Mahabharata, we just got it. One of the most important ancient Indian literature, or even the world, they told us, right? Right, in Ancient History Encyclopedia. Alright, so Maya is mentioned there too as one of the 6 individuals who were allowed to escape with their life at the burning of the forest of Kandava, whose inhabitants were all destroyed. You hear that? Everything happened, they got overtaken. Now we know, we've read before how that even in the Maya kingdoms, they were warring against each other. They were taking over some, and they were, destroy the whole city or town, take everybody, take the wisest prisoners. So this is maybe another part of this. Like, we probably might be looking at the other side of the story, right, from the Hindus' perspective. So they're saying that this dude Maya in the Mahabharata, he was one of the ones that they were allowed to escape. Was he royal? He was allowed to be gone with their life at the burning of the forest of Kandava, whose inhabitants were all destroyed. Alright, we read in John Campbell Ullman's work, The Great Indian Epics. Now, Maya was the chief architect of the Danavas, alright, chief architect, and in gratitude for his preservation, built a wonderful sabha, or hall, for the Pandavas, the most beautiful structure of its kind in the whole world, alright, that was built by Maya, that great Indian epics. Alright, check it out. Danava, it says too. Now we're in the footnote number 2. Now remember, look at this. Danava. Now look at this. It says Tanhava. Tan, mist. Ha, water. Ba, a composite particle used to form reflective dissonances. They who live in the midst of the water. Navigators. Danava. Let's go back to that again. Now we got a little more clear perspective. It was telling us that the Mayas, are the aborigines of the country, or the Nagas, as we shall see later on. Alright, we're gonna read this whole book of these. J. Talboys Wheeler, in his History of India, says the traditions of the Nagas are obscure in the extreme. They point, however, to the existence of an ancient Naga empire in the Deccan, having its capital in the modern town of Nagpur. And it may be conjectured that prior to the Aryan invasion, the Naga Rajas, Naga exercised an imperial power over the greatest part of the Punjab in Hindustan, alright? It was an imperial power. These were the royal people, these were the aborigines, people who came from Mesoamerica, the motherland, Atlantis, whatever you want to call it. Alright, the first land out of the primordial waters, Mayak. Says the Nagas, or serpent worshippers, dodged the hijack, who lived in crowded cities and were famous for their beautiful women and exhaustless treasures. Their beautiful women were doubtless a civilized people living under an organized government. No doubt that they were civilized, alright? They were civilized. Indeed, if any inference can be drawn from the epic legends, it would be that prior to the Aryan conquest, the Naga Rajas were ruling powers who had cultivated the art of luxury to an extraordinary degree, and yet succeeded in maintaining a protracted struggle against the Aryan invaders. Oh, who's these Aryan guys messing with the Nagas? Like the English of today, the Mayas sent colonists all over the earth. These carried with them the language, traditions, the architecture, astronomy, cosmogony, and other sciences, in a word, the civilization of their mother country. It is this civilization that furnishes us with the means of ascertaining the role played by them in the universal history of the world. We find vestiges of it and of their language, all historical nations of antiquity in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Speaking the mother tongue they brought from over here, because the mother tongue is from over here. It is easy to follow their tracks across the Pacific to India, very easy, by the imprint of their hands dipped in a red liquid and pressed against the walls of temples and caves and other places looked upon as sacred, to implore the benison of the gods, also by their name, Maya, given to the banana tree, symbol of their country, the banana tree, alright, that's from here. They came here, they landed here, it's like, wow, look at all these fruits growing there, this is paradise. All these food crops, right? We got in Africa, right, there's 640 food crops, right, just about, and out of those 640 food crops, 600 are of American origin. These are facts. You don't know because you don't research. Alright, again, they're known by a name Maya, given to the banana tree, symbol of their country, man, whose broad leaves is yet a token of hospitality. Alright, a token of hospitality among the natives of the islands, then along the shores of the Indian Ocean and those of the Persian Gulf to the mouth of the Euphrates, up that river to Babylon, then renowned city of the sun, then across the Syrian desert to the valley of the Nile, where they finally settled and gave the name of their mother country to a district of Nubia, calling it Mayu or Mayo. Alright, so just real quick, alright, going right back to the book. So we're in this book right now. Let me just zoom in just so we can verify some of this information that Augustus is telling us. So it says here that this book is called A History of Egypt Under the Pharaohs, derived entirely from the monuments by Henry Brooksby, right? It's actually naming towns of Upper and Lower Egypt, right? The land of Kita, the land of Assur, the land of Singara, and what they get from there, like silver, gold from here, alright, real artistic roots, alright, so it keeps going and it starts naming a lot of lands down over here. It says, in order to give the opportunity to learned inquirers to compare these names with those which have been transmitted to us from antiquity or which even now exist in modern times, we will give a complete copy of them on the authority of the inscriptions themselves. Alright, so it says, catalog of the following peoples of the south countries and of the An, wandering peoples, in Kont Hong Nofer, which the king has conquered, making a great slaughter of them. No man knows their number. So they got conquered, these people is about to name out. No man knows their number. All the inhabitants were carried away as living prisoners to thieves. You see all these inhabitants, they got carried away to thieves. Sounds like what? So they were prisoners in Egypt, in bondage, right? These inhabitants they're about to name out. Alright, this is from the inscription in Egypt. Alright, so these people he's about to take out, so many of them, they, you know, and he actually conquered and slaughtered a lot of them, right? And he brought them over as prisoners to thieves, to Egypt, to fill the provision house of his father, the Teben Ammon. Now are all people subject to the king, as was the will of his father Ammon. Alright? So it says the miserable Cush, Ater or Atel Adulis, Atel Mayo. There we go, M-A-I-O, Mayo, the Mayo. Atamu in the inscription of Adulis. It says number 4, Mayo, gold and incense land. The land where there's gold, Mayu, gold and incense. Alright, and it keeps going. Artek, now Arteko near Masuna. Alright, and it lists out all these people got conquered and sent over. Maya? They got enslaved and sent prisoners to Mayu. The people of Mayu, they got sent as prisoners to thieves. Alright, they're still subject, and during this time that the inscription was written, they were subject to them at that time still. Alright, so Mayu, this word, this reference is over there in Egypt. This is from their inscriptions. This is a whole totally different book. Alright, so let's go back to Augustus Leprechaun, Queen Mu. Alright, we're back. So he said they finally settled. So he's talking about the Mayas, how they went from from the Pacific down into India, all those countries, over to the other side and into Egypt, the Nile, right? And then where they set up a district in Nubia, calling it Mayu or Mayo. Alright, after becoming firmly established in Egypt, they sent colonists to Syria. These reached as far north as Mount Taurus, founding on their way settlements along the coast of the Mediterranean in Sudan, Tyre, the valley of Orontes, and again on the banks of the Euphrates to the north of Babylon and Mesopotamia. Alright, so we got to look at this like, is he talking about the other side, or is he talking about the real Mesopotamia, the real Euphrates, Babylon? Alright, that could have been all around here, connected here, right? Or on the other side, either way, he's letting you know it's the Maya who brought civilization to these places. Now it says Mayak, that is, the land that first arose from the bottom of the deep. Alright, the womb, we just heard in the Ramaya, that Maya is from the womb, the land of the womb that came out first, right, in the Ramaya. So again, Mayak, we got that in the last video, right? The land that first arose from the bottom of the deep. We know that the Ya'ak is turtle, the water turtle that came out, the turtle, right? Turtle Island was the name of the empire whose sovereigns bore the title of Khan, or serpent, no serpent worshippers, not Naga serpent. We're talking about the title of the Khans, the Khan. Right, in Asiatic countries, it's called Khan. They took the title. They took your title. They took your title and created their title. Genghis Khan? Nah, he wasn't the first. He just took a title. He just took over a whole throne, a whole empire that was yours. Alright, it says this title given by the Mayas to their rulers was derived from the contour of the empire, that of a serpent with an inflated breast, the plum serpent, which in their books and their sculptures they represented sometimes with, sometimes without wings, sometimes with, sometimes without wings. All right, as the Egyptians did the Uraeus, symbol of their country. All right, just like the Egyptians copied. All right, Aelian says it was the custom of the Egyptian kings to wear apes of different colors in their crowns, this reptile being emblematic of the invisible power of royalty. But he does not inform us why it was selected as such an emblem. Alright, they don't know why though when they tell you their history, nor does Plutarch, although he also tells us that it was the symbol of royalty. Pausanias affirms that the Aes was held sacred throughout Egypt, that at Omphis particularly enjoyed the greatest honor. Silarchus states the same thing. Alright, he's quoting all of them, right, so you can go look at the source. Alright, what they're saying. Still, the Egyptian sages must have had very strong motives for thus honoring this serpent and causing it to play so conspicuous a part in the mysteries of their religion. Was it perchance in commemoration of the mother country? Could have been that? Of their ancestors beyond the sea toward the setting sun? Could it have been that? There the ancient rulers, after receiving the honors of apotheosis, were always represented in the monuments as serpents covered with feathers. What? The heads adorned with horns. We're talking about the Dracons. A feathered serpent with horn, a Dracon, and a flame fire instead of the crown, often also was simply a crown, a Dracon. It is well to remember that in Egypt, the Cerastes, or honored snakes, were the only serpents with the asps that were held as sacred. Alright, don't forget what Amaru means. Amaru is the Andino, or the dragon of the Andes. The Amaru is basically the same thing as feathered serpent. Amaru Khan, get it? Amara Khan, Tamari, land of the beloved. Herodotus tells us that when they die, they are buried in the temple of Jupiter, to whom they are reputed sacred. Oh, big one right there. We're talking about the pyramid of Cholula, because we're talking about that Herodotus describes the pyramid of Jupiter Belus exactly the same way that the pyramid of Cholula looks. This is confirmed by many people and by Alexander the Humble. He says it's an exact copy of what Herodotus described as the Tower of Belus or Jupiter in Babylon. So what are we talking about when we're talking about buried in the temple of Jupiter? Are we talking about the pyramid of Cholula and the true old world, whom they are reputed sacred? It says the Maya Empire comprised all the lands between the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and that of Darien. Darien is all the way down into Panama. So the whole, from the Yucatan down all the way down to Panama, that was the whole Maya Empire. Alright? But the capital was more like towards the Yucatan, Guatemala areas, those main cities. Today, known today as Central America, okay? Central America. The history of the sovereigns that had governed it and of the principal events that had taken place in the nation was written in well-bound books, but papyrus or parchments covered with highly ornamented wooden boards, while the most important occurrences were likewise carved in stone on the walls of their public edifices to preserve their record in a lasting and indelible manner for the knowledge of future generations. All right, the history is there, the sources are there, they got their history unlocked, their origin story, everything. That's what it's trying to let you know, that in these places like Greek is all mythology. The origin is all mythology. The gods is all mythology. There's no origin. There's no physical proof of their origin other than mythology, just like in Egypt. You understand? Where did the language come about? How did they start learning science and building pyramids? It's all mythology. It was given to them by the gods, right? These gods were living people living in that and over here in Mayak, Atlantis, whatever you want, land of Mu, whatever you want to call it, over here. And this is in the walls, this is in the scribes, this is still written in their stories. You just got to go research it, learn the language if you have to. Alright, because it's there for the knowledge of future generations. It is from these sculptured and written memoirs graven on their palaces at Uxmal and Chichen in the peninsula of Yucatan, the head of the imperial serpent and the seat of the government of the Maya Empire, alright, that the author has learned the history of Queen Mu and her family. That's where he learned about it. Where? In Uxmal and Chichen. He learned about the story of Queen Mu and her family. Alright, letting you know.
We get to enter the tomb of Maya. Stephen, please.
Well, this is a chapel or a temple of Maya. Now, Maya was a title, not a name, of both men and women throughout dynastic times. This particular era is around the 18th dynasty, the time of the so-called King Horeb. Now, the key thing here is 1997, Hakim came to the United States, to California. He and my research partner, Bob Butter, and I met him for a couple of weeks, and we discussed. One of the things he discussed on a return trip to Egypt in September of 1997 would be, he said, he would show us evidence of a Mayan temple in Egypt.
Mayan as in culture.
Exactly. And I said, this I never heard of. No, it's not in any text. No one has ever mentioned. Okay, we came here. This was arranged differently then. A lot of this is new construction. It was not this way in 1997. First of all, I looked on the wall. Behind you, you see, that is Maya, but he looks typically Commission. Right. And I'm looking around, typically commissioned, all the looks. So Hakim would use the expression, well, you know, Stephen, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. He's living in Kemet, he's going to pass in Kemet, so he's portraying himself as a Commission. So I said, well, Papa, this is great, but I can't go with this in front of an academic audience. They'll laugh me off the stage. There's nothing here to identify with the culture we're talking about. But then there was a keeper like this gentleman here, was here, didn't speak any English, but saw that I was perplexed. He said, come here. This then was boarded up with just a wooden door. And there was latches there. He threw away the wooden slabs, opened the door, and he said, look up. And that is the key. Took a picture in 1997. sent it to Mayan gatekeeper Hunbat's men. He said he recognizes this as the language of the Itza people, whereas Chichen Itza, he said, is an ancient language. But a lot of people are not sure about Hunbat's men. So we went one step further. In 2010, I got to meet Don Alejandro Sul Ojaj. He is the wisdom keeper, the head of the Quiche Maya of all of Guatemala. I showed him this picture, and his eyes went as big as saucers. And he said to me, that is the language of my ancestors. That is a calendar. That is telling the date of when Maya was here. And how we can't read it, he can't even still read it, but he knows that the circles and squares and different colors, arrangements, and the spokes in the wheel are indications of a date. So, this has never been discussed by any Egyptologist. They cannot put this in a Commission context. There is nothing, or maybe there is, others that Yosef has seen, but there's nothing like this in the rest of Egypt. So, Mayan elders recognize this as part of their culture. So now the key is, Maya, the word is a title. Men and women had the title. Very interesting, because we've talked about the difference between Egyptian Arabic and other Arabic. In Egypt, one of the key words for water is Maya. It is not pronounced the same way in any other Arabic country. If you went to Saudi Arabia, they would say Ma or Meh. Only in Egypt is it pronounced Maya. And it means water. So I asked Hakim, could the title Maya actually have meant he who came from across the water, or ones who came from across the water? He said yes. So here is what we call diffusionism archaeology, diffusionism anthropology, saying that there had to be cultural contact between these individuals thousands of miles across the sea. And this is the evidence that Hakim told us that there was a Mayan living in Egypt 3,300 years ago. Let somebody else define that for me and tell me that that is Commission or Egyptian or dynastic or anything else. Hello. Where's the foot there? Now, when Muhammad went to school, they taught him the foot was this consonant B, which has no meaning. That's not how Hakim looked at the glyphs. He understood this to be the knee to the bottom of the foot, and it meant reliability, and was pronounced Bay. The Greeks came along, made it Beta, B, no meaning. It had a meaning, reliability. What does this mean? Well, water, reliability. The priest was known as the man who knows water, or the one who works with water. Now understand, this was major occupation. Water was a key understanding of these people. So you'd have a hydraulic engineer, somebody who drills the trenches, somebody who's a dowser, would find the water, many, many different things. So the Ascot priest was very important. The one who knows water. Why is this the bay here? Because you can rely on the one who knows water. That's how we read the glyphs. Not consonants, A, B, C, D, Jack and Jill went up the hill to get a glass of water. I brought a group here in the 2000s. There was a man named JP who was married to a Mexican lady named Myra. She was of Mayan blood. I was back in that same chamber just before talking about Satet. She kind of grabbed and said, Stephen, come here, I have to show you something. What? She said, this is a Mayan headdress. Sure. This is not native Commission. Yep. It's Quetzal feathers. It looks like, here's the priest. He's having himself disguised as a Mayan. So maybe there was a contact. And we know the other one goes back at least 3,300 years. So this is some more evidence we believe that there was contact between the Mayans and the Commissions. And when I sent this, the thing that I spoke about and showed to Hunbat's men, he said it was clear in their tradition, so with Del Alejandro, that the Mayans had come here and the Commissions had come there. So we've heard rumors for years of Commission glyphs on Mayan temples. I've yet to see a picture of them, but there supposedly are Commission glyphs somewhere in Mayan temples that's yet to be found. But we know that they were here.
Do you have anything in this book about the Olmecs?
No, not really. I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth.
Can you explain that to people that maybe
in Fingerprints of the Gods? Yes. So it's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya. But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs. again, we don't know what they called themselves. That's what the Aztecs called them. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people because that rubber producing area of Mexico. They worked in giant megalithic constructions. What they're most famous for is these huge carved human heads, which can be on a scale of up to 20 to 25 tons in weight, and which have curious features which have been interpreted variously as Polynesian, African, don't look like classic Native American features.
Keep that up.
But one of the things I've realized is that there is no classic Native American feature. That Native Americans are have a very complex genetic story with very many different elements brought into it, and we shouldn't be necessarily surprised by the supposedly non-Native American look of these Olmec heads.
What do we think those helmets were that they were wearing?
Nobody knows, because no physical example of such a helmet has ever been found, just like no physical example of an Egyptian pharaoh's crown has ever been found. All we see is the stone reproductions of them.
Do they universally wear these helmets in these stone reproductions?
They pretty much all wear these helmets in the Olmec stonework. There's another fascinating figure from La Venta, one of the Olmec sites, which is the earliest ever image of a plumed or feathered serpent. The feathered serpent is a famous icon in Central America. Quetzalcoatl, who's the god of peace, the bringer of civilization, who is associated, for example, with the famous pyramid of Kukulkan, which is just another name for Quetzalcoatl at Chichen Itza, where on the spring equinox a shadow effect creates the image of a serpent coiling down the stairway and joining with the carved head of the serpent. There's the image from La Venta. That's the earliest image of a plumed serpent in the Americas. And sitting in the middle of it, and I made a big deal out of this because I think it is a big deal in Magicians of the Gods, sitting in the middle of it is this human figure who's holding this strange bag in his hand. And it's just a fact that those identical bags are found in ancient Sumer in the hands of individuals who were considered to be civilization bringers, and they also show up on Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. I call them man bags. And in that case, at Göbekli Tepe, we know they're at least 11,600 years old. So I wonder if we're looking at a sort of badge of office of a group of civilizers who traveled around the world trying to bring back to life a lost...
When I interrupted you to talk about Quetzalcoatl, what were you about to say?
I can't remember.
Oh.
I'm in California. I've been smoking lots of dope, you know.
We were talking about different things in the Amazon. Should we rewind and figure out what we said?
Yeah, the serpent god you were talking about.
Before Quetzalcoatl, before that. I have another question. The Olmecs, you were talking about the genetics of these people that live in Native Americans, that they vary widely, but the Olmecs seem to have very similar features, the thick lips, the wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous skulls in parts of Brazil, which appear to show very strongly Polynesian or African features, very much like the features that we see on the Olmec heads. And a number of archaeologists who got into trouble with their colleagues for this have used that to argue many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized. And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that there was something really weird happened with settlement. You see, what happened with those African or Polynesian-looking skulls was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what that DNA showed was that they were more closely related to modern Native Americans than they are to any other people in the world. So the notion that there was some connection with Polynesia or Africa was dismissed. But now that we have very firm evidence of an Australasian genetic signal, Australian Aborigines, Papua New Guinea, Melanesians, with those kind of features, now that we have the genetic evidence that is found in the Amazon, we have to go back to that old evidence and reconsider it.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to find out what that is. They've always fascinated me. The Olmecs, it's always been such a strange image, the large heads with the helmets on them, and how do they universally look like that? I mean, all
of the features are very, very similar.
Wow.
They're very, very, very similar.
And always with the helmets.
And almost always, I won't claim that every single Olmec head has a helmet of it, because I think I've seen one that didn't. It's quite a while ago since I explored the Olmec area. But what's fascinating about them is they are supposedly the first high civilization of Central America, that they create structures on a massive scale, that you can see connections between them and the later Maya. That whole mystery of the Mayan calendar was clearly inherited from the Olmecs. It wasn't something the Maya made up. The Olmecs used that same symbolism. So the Mayan calendar is actually an Olmec calendar, and if we then consider the possibility that the Olmecs may just be the latest, the earliest surviving manifestation of that calendar, it could go back much further than that.
All right, so before we continue, just want to come back to this video that I made. This is part 10 of Untold Ancient American Truth, another of this same series. Part 10, the ancient Nagas are the Maya. All right, we just already read that, but this was another part. This was actually the preface of that book. All right, so get that drop. Now I want to go back to this because we're talking about again, the Masons told us they already know this is ancient Egypt. This is when you're dealing with prehistory, you're dealing with America, Atlantis. All right, so let's get this again because it correlates what we're doing. We saw in the last video, what they found there and the hieroglyphics, how they were comparing it. Right, with the Maya and the Egyptian, and how what it means, and the whole story behind Mayak. All right, so let's get this again like it's the first time. So this is called Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids by Peter Tompkins, author of Secret of the Great Pyramid. All right, so I'm on page 116 of this book, and I just wanted to zoom into this table right here, this chart. Just wanted to show you real quick. All right. Says Maya and Egyptian. All right, they're comparing the hieroglyphics. All right, so you see that? Very similar, right? In some cases, this one right here. Look at that. Not too different. All right, so you understand who's the real Nagas, and we got it in the past videos, who civilized who. Right, we're just gonna get more correlation in this video. All right, it says a later comparison between Mayan and Egyptian alphabets. Just want to read about this part of the book, but first they're going to be mentioning this archaeologist. It says in the College of San Gregorio, Mexico City, Brasseur discovered a manuscript in Nahuatl to which he gave the name of Chimalpopoca Codice in honor of his teacher of Nahuatl, Faustino C. Galicia, who was a descendant of Moctezuma's third son. Alright, so this Brasseur is a French guy. He actually translated the Popol Vuh also in French. It's very popular. So it was a Spanish translation. We got this before in my last Hebrew video. Alright, and we mentioned Brasseur as well. So I just want to read here what Brasseur says. It says Brasseur also traced the myth of Quetzalcoatl back to Plato's Atlantis. So Quetzalcoatl is from Atlantis. And concluded that the Toltecs could have been descendants of survivors of that catastrophe. Gradually, Brasseur ascribed an increase in antiquity to the native cultures of Mesoamerica and came to believe that many of the truths of modern science had already been anticipated by the inhabitants of Mesoamerica many centuries previously. He's saying that he had to increase how old they were, antiquity, the Mayas, or the natives of Mesoamerica, or the cultures, alright, the aboriginal cultures of Mesoamerica, and that many of the truths that we know today as modern science, as fact, right? This was already anticipated by our ancestors back in the day in Mesoamerica, many centuries previously, right? Science, high advanced, math, science, architecture was all here. As he grew older, his cultivated notions grew out of step with those of his academic contemporaries. His penchant for seeing in myths of antiquity explanations for what might have been actual history was too much for them. Alright, so he was breaking down that these myths were actually real history. not just a myth. And he's saying the other historians couldn't handle that. They weren't ready for that. As one historian summed up the situation, unfortunately, as book after book appeared, his ideas grew more strange and his explanations more attenuated, so that serious leaders who had respected him increasingly lost confidence in his utterances. So his books and a lot of his works weren't mentioned. They're not really mentioned in a lot of textbooks. They do this on purpose. Brasseur complained that no serious archaeological work was being done in the Americas, that it was foolish to try to write world history, leaving out one half the world. All right. How could they try to write world history when they only writing about the other side of the world, when we got all these advanced civilizations over here on the other half of the world, right? So it was so foolish to try to write world history leaving out one half of the world, the Americas. He believed the Carians of Central America to have been the oldest known civilization. The oldest, he's talking about in the world, not just in the Americas. And industrious and commercial people who could handle metal and precious stones. Great sailors and astronomers who had traveled the world colonizing Atlantis. They colonized it. This is Atlantis. This is that center. This is the origin. And they also colonized what? The Mediterranean and ancient Egypt. Who civilized who? Whose astronomy, physics, and religious practices were similar, including a strong cult of Sirius, the dog star, and deification of the crocodile, from all which Brasseur concluded that either Egypt had been a Central American colony or vice versa. And the truth is that it was just a colony of Atlantis, so-called Atlantis, America, or Central American colony. All right?
The Maya.
Alright, so I just want to continue. This is on page 350 in this book, Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids. It says, this tablet right here, you see this one right here? It's on the wall somewhere. It says, Hugh Fox and his Gods of the Cataclysm says, the association with the yogic trance is especially evident in these Monte Album figures, alright? A yogic dance, that's like a Hindu thing, right? But we see that there was actually here with the Maya. In these Monte Album figures, because the design portrayed on the dancers' bodies are chakras. Alright, these are chakras. You see the chakras? Alright, we had that knowledge of that here. The mystic centers connected with successful meditation. Alright. Let me just read this part right here. It says, like the Olmecs, the earliest known settlers of Monte Album had a hieroglyphic system of writing, a calendar, and a mathematical system of computing by bar and dot. these settlers left some extraordinary cyclopean rocks built into buildings which portray life-size Negroid dancers with flat noses, round faces, and thick lips. Alongside them are Old Testament types. Old Testament types? Alongside them are Old Testament types. Old Testament types. You see that? With hooked noses and spatulate beards. All very un-Indian. You're talking about the modern day so-called Native Americans, right? They don't resemble them. Archaeologists date these finds around 500 BC and attribute the ruins to the Olmec, alright? Again, they just named that as a tag. They didn't call themselves Olmec or rubber people. That's what they named them, alright? It says startling Semitic figures found throughout Mesoamerica. You see this? I'm on page 113, wanted to read this part to you. More correlation to what we're learning. It says, now I shall try to fix an appropriate date of the Naga colony in India before it became a colonial empire. Alright, so a colony. One prominent figure in the Naga or Maya Empire in India. So this Naga Empire is really the Maya Empire in India. It's a colony of the Mayas. So it says that one prominent figure of this Naga or Maya Empire in India was Prince Maya. Yes, Prince Maya. They had a prince. His name was Maya. The time of Prince Maya is doubtful. Although I have come across many records about him, not a single one even estimates the day when he lived. But according to traditions, and these traditions are as plentiful as leaves on a tree, Prince Maya lived 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. In Ramayana, or in the Ramayana, alright, that's a book, an ancient Hindu book of poems or stories or something like that, alright, we find this reference to him. In olden times, there was a prince of the Nagas, whose name was Maya, of the Serpent Kings, of the Nagas. Who's the Serpent Kings again? The Mayas, right? His name was Maya. Prince Maya was the author of the Surya Siddhanta, the hoariest treatise on astronomy in India. Its age has been variously estimated at from 10,000 to 22,000 years. At the time of Prince Maya, the Nagas were an empire. When the handle and shovel of this knife were made, the Nagas were a colony, antedating the empire. That they were only a colony is clearly shown by the suns without rays on the horizon. This proves the extreme antiquity of the handle and the sheath. Alright? And this is what they're talking about, this knife and handle, the Naga Hindu knife, they call it. It is not known when the Naga Empire ended, but they're saying that this is very old, before their empire was established, when they were just colonists coming from America.
This ancient observatory suggests a knowledge of astronomy that rivals anything we know today. Yet it was built more than 1,000 years ago. Who designed it? Where did they get their knowledge? Most puzzling of all, where did they go? Deep within the jungles of Mexico and Guatemala, a culture emerged unlike any other. At Tikal, the sacred heart of the Mayan world, pyramids stand as ancient links between earth and sky. Why did this ancient people build such elaborate ceremonial complexes? Pre-Columbian scholar and poet Al Urista believes the Maya to be the oldest culture in the world.
The pyramids that these people built were centers of learning. There were places where men and women were to become creators, masters of energy, masters of matter and energy. People who would learn in those centers how to transform matter and energy. There were also initiatory chambers, not open to everybody. These secret societies were dedicated to the study of astronomy based on mathematics.
No evidence has been found to explain the Mayan advances in astronomy and mathematics. The silent sentinels they left behind indicate only the methods they used to mark the passage of time. They could easily compute the exact day of the week a given date would fall 400 million years later. Ancient Mayans devised a unique numbering system. They used dots to signify 1, bars for 5, and a simple stylized shell for 0. Thus they anticipated our decimal system by thousands of years. In 1947, Giles Healy made an extraordinary discovery. In a small temple in a seemingly unimportant religious center called Bonampak, Healy found a gold mine of information about Mayan ceremonial life. In 3 small chambers, he uncovered a series of exquisite murals documenting the pageantry of a 1,000-year-old religion. The murals tell of a grand processional of music and masked dancers who appear to be impersonating mysterious gods, perhaps in the hopes of winning their favor. There is a raid on a nearby village. Captives are taken. Prisoners sacrificed. Significantly, there is always present one commanding figure, the priest astronomer. The Palace Observatory at Palenque reveals the priest to be preoccupied with the study of the stars and preserving the ancient sacred mysteries. Long before Columbus, Mayan men of knowledge filled libraries with hundreds of books on their history and the complex cycles of the planets. These books were important because the priests believed that history repeats itself. Carefully recorded events were for them a guide to the future.
The Mayan written language is still largely undeciphered. One day, it might provide answers to some puzzling questions. This toy crocodile is evidence that the wheel was known to the early Mayans, but they made no practical use of it. Why?
The priest scientist directed the building of an elaborate road system. The longest cuts an absolutely straight line 62 miles through the jungle. One wonders about the spiritual motivation behind the construction of this complex network linking sacred cities. One road ends at Uxmal, the oldest Mayan city in the Yucatan Peninsula. It can be seen as a colossal monument to one thing, the snake. Al Urista explains.
The basic assumptions about life in the universe were that nothing is static on Earth. Everything moves, and everything that moves has a measure. And everything that has a measure moves in a spiral. Nothing moves in a straight line. This is the way they conceived energy, and that's why they call themselves the Chan clan. Chan simply means snake.
In the north, the snake cult reached its greatest power, symbolized by a new god called Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Mayan folklore holds that Kukulkan was who brought a renaissance to citadels like Chichen Itza and provided the Mayans with a highly advanced knowledge of engineering and astronomy. From Chichen Itza's observatory, the Mayan priests, it was said, read the future in the patterns of the stars.
Out of nothingness right now. We're all pressing on the
In ancient times, Chichen Itza was a thriving ceremonial center, a place of pilgrimage, where Mayans came to worship and enjoy society.
But now is when it begins. See? Now is the time.
priests were careful to attend to their civic responsibilities, they were forever seeking ways to provide spiritual guidance for their subjects. To that end, Kukulkan erected a perfect calendar temple. A pyramid with 364 steps leading up to the temple, which represents the 365th day of the tropical year. Legend has it that Kukulkan understood the power of the snake. He thus translated this power and energy into a recurring architectural phenomenon. Twice a year, on the spring and fall equinox at precisely 5 p.m., the sun reveals a serpent slithering down the temple's balustrade, dramatically announcing the end of one seasonal cycle and the beginning of another. According to legend, the enlightened Kukulkan disappears and black sorcerers come from the north. At the sacred well, archaeologists have dredged up hundreds of human bones. The Mayans believed that only the most perfect children were pure enough for the gods. Ancient Mayans played the first known team sport in history. For them, it had terrifying consequences. It was played by priests on a huge ball court linked astronomically to a map of the heavens. Without using hands or feet, the object was to send a rubber ball through a small ring set high on the wall. Winning was so rare that victors were rewarded with all the spectators' possessions. Losing meant that the players were put to death. Then it appears that suddenly the priests left the temples. Did Mayan astronomers see a different age in the stars? Was it the end of a cosmic cycle? No one knows for sure. It is a strange and fascinating puzzle. The answer may be found in an incredible drama played out in an obscure place by men who served a different god. The ancient Mayans abandoned their sacred cities hundreds of years before the arrival of the Spanish in the New World. When the Spaniards came, they were awed by the architectural triumph of Mayan cities and at the same time mystified by the radically different people who had built them. The coming of the Spanish friars cemented the Spanish conquest of the Yucatan. The conquistadores came to battle foreign soldiers. The friars came to battle foreign gods. Gathering up all the Mayan archives, all the chronicles of this ancient wisdom, the friars came together at Mani. Alarista laments the occasion.
The Mayan books were burnt during the conquest by the religious zeal of the Christians led by Bishop Landa. This is a terrible catastrophe given the fact that the Mayas constitute the oldest civilization in the world. It's interesting to note that that religious zeal, that antagonism against Mayan knowledge was sourced in the Mayan use of the snake. The Christians associated the snake with the devil, and seeing that the Mayas had the snake in every single one of their sculptures, in every single one of their halls, in their clothing, in their jewelry, they concluded that these people were children of the devil, and that any information or knowledge associated with these people was obviously the knowledge of the devil that had to be destroyed.
Now the conquest was utter and complete. The destruction of Mayan knowledge was ruthless and would forever frustrate scholars by its loss. If there was ever a key to the mysterious hieroglyphic writing, it is gone, and we are left to speculate about the strange disappearance of this remarkable civilization.
Another possible explanation is that the Mayans moved to escape a natural catastrophe, perhaps an earthquake. The area is known for them.
Guatemala City sits on a 40-million-year-old fault. On February 4th, 1976, at 3:04 a.m., the Earth shook with such a violence that it resulted in one of the worst disasters to ever hit the Western Hemisphere. 90 times stronger than the quake that leveled Managua, Nicaragua in 1972, it was felt along a 2,000-mile strip of Central America, right through the heart of the ancient Mayan world. The quake fractured the land, reducing a great city to rubble. It destroyed 20% of all buildings and left more than 1 million homeless. In the end, 23,000 died. Yet even with such a history of earthquakes, people do not seem to have been discouraged from building and settling along this ancient fault line. Some believe that the Mayans abandoned their lands because of crop failure. They simply depleted the soil and had to move on. For thousands of years, Mayan peasants have been beating back the jungle, burning out cornfields. Even today, corn makes up 80% of the Mayan diet. Crop failure is a horrendous disaster. But Alarista is unconvinced. He dismisses such easy explanations as earthquake and crop failure.
The pre-scientists were able to predict earthquakes as well as the kind of weather conditions that would be propitious for a specific kernel of corn. And there were 28 kernels of corn developed for specific weather conditions. These people had developed a socialist, a communistic society where everything that was raised by the people was distributed to the people according to their needs. They also use psychic energy in order to attract clouds in the event of drought, so that the idea of rain dance is not really a very far out idea if you understand it in terms of psychic energy. The Mayas had a very good reason for building their pyramids on these energy grids, because this enabled them to awaken psychic energy within initiates that came to these art centers. The Maya Itzai disappeared mysteriously, but they did not leave the earth. They simply concluded a cycle of civilization and took off to the east. The journey to the east starts right here in the peninsula de Yucatan. It is from this peninsula that they cross the sea, stop in Egypt into the Red Sea, go up towards Nepal. It was there that they started their second cycle of civilization. One of the colonies of the Maya Itzai was to be found at the foot of the Dead Sea, where the monastery of the Essenes was located. It was there that Jesus learned about the philosophy of the world.
Alarista offers a startling conclusion.
The last words of Christ on the cross were not Aramaic words, they were stylized Mayan words, and they did not mean, "Oh God, why have thou forsaken me?" They meant, "At last I sink in the dawn of your presence."
Perhaps the ancient Mayans anticipated this when they wrote long ago, "All moons, all years, all days, all winds take their course and pass away." The ancient Mayans, men of knowledge, conceived their time on Earth, their cycle of civilization, to be 5,200 years. Beginning their calendar August 12th, 3113 BC, they predicted that on December 24th, 2011 AD, a cataclysmic earthquake would terminate their cycle of civilization. New men of knowledge would then appear to fight the forces of evil and lead the people to create a world government. If the Mayan men of knowledge were right, in just 34 years, we may learn the answers to some of the ancient Mayan mysteries.
A general term used for early Christian Gnostics was Ophites, as we have seen, although it is probably too strong to call them Christians in the modern sense. Epiphanius says, the Ophites sprung out of the Nicolaitans and Gnostics, and were so called from the serpent which they worshipped. They taught that the ruler of this world was of draconic form, and the Ophites attribute all wisdom to the serpent of paradise, and say that he was the author of knowledge of men, linking him to the Tautus of the Phoenicians. They keep a live serpent in a chest, and at the time of the mysteries entice him out by placing bread before him upon a table. Opening his door, he comes out, and having ascended the table, folds himself about the bread. They not only break the bread and distribute this among the votaries, but whosoever will may kiss the serpent. This the wretched people call the Eucharist. They conclude the mysteries by singing a hymn through him to the Supreme Father. An amazing declaration which speaks volumes. It tells us that, like the ancient Egyptians, the serpent was symbolic of the sun and must be constantly enticed to rise. Kissing the bread is the simple revelation that the sun indeed feeds us by giving life to our agricultural world. The Eucharist mediator is the serpent, as Christ was the mediator on the cross, a symbol, an act more ancient than Christ, and rooted itself in serpent worship. The serpent was itself sacrificed on the sacred tree, or Asherah. This also relates to the rites of Bacchus, where snakes were carried in baskets of cakes and bread, the food then being given to the votaries. In these bacchanalian rites, there was also the consecrated wine, which was handed around. Remarkably, this ritual used a special chalice or grail object called the cup of the Agatha demon, meaning simply good serpent. This serpent-consecrated cup of wine was handed around after supper, just like the Last Supper of Christ, and was received with much shouting and joyousness. The hymn sung via the serpent to the Supreme Father was just the same as the one sung in the memory of Python at Delphi on the 7th day of the week. Now, thousands of years later, Christians still take the cup of Christ, called the cup of the serpent by the Gnostics, and eat the consecrated bread. This special ritual is none other than the original but renamed cup of the sacred serpent, which gives the body and blood of our oldest god. A 3rd century Persian teacher known as Manes, who said that Christianity had got things wrong, and he was here to put it right, attempted to revive these old ways. Regardless of the Christian attempts to kill off Manichaeism, it survived until the 13th century. He is said to have revived Ophiolatreia, or serpent worship, where he taught that Christ was an incarnation of the great serpent, who glided over the cradle of the Virgin Mary when she was asleep at the age of 1.5 years. But the worship of the serpent was much more ancient than even Manes stated. The chief title of the British serpent god was Hu, the dragon ruler of the world. The title probably given as Huas or Hyas, a name for Bacchus. The druid was known as a Gnada, also known as an adder, having dropped the GN, as the adder was the symbol of the god Hu, and Dean believed that the druids were Ophites of the original stock. They worshipped also Beli, so in this respect, the druids were probably the last truly serpent-worshipping priests in Europe. A bardic poem cited by Dean: with solemn festivity round the 2 lakes, with the lake next my side, with my side moving round the sanctuary, while the sanctuary is earnestly invoking the gliding king, before whom the fair one retreats upon the veil that covers the huge stones, whilst the dragon moves round over the places which contain the vessels of drink offering, whilst the drink offering is in the golden horns, whilst the golden horns are in the hand, whilst the knife is upon the chief victim. Sincerely I implore thee, O victorious bell. Moving round like the serpent, sacred stones, all this sounds remarkably like the Avebury Serpent Passage and others, and what is at the end but a golden horn, a chalice offering. In all the research on the serpent worshippers, there are some things we cannot deny. They were very real. They existed across the globe, and they built huge stone structures everywhere. The Omphalos is an example of this. According to Herodotus, a sacred serpent was fed honey cakes once a month at the Acropolis in Athens. These honey cakes were marked with the Omphalos. The superstition of the Omphalos was widespread, like the serpent belief from India to Greece. It is a boss or orb with spiral lines, thought to represent serpents coiled. There are similar markings on ancient stone monuments across the world, especially at Newgrange in Ireland. Quintus Curtius also pointed out that in Africa there were such stones with spiral lines drawn, said to be a symbol of the serpent deity. To the Etruscans, the Omphalos was seen as a route to the underworld. It was placed in a trench called a mundus, or earth, and the first fruits offered into the trench, which was then covered by a huge stone. The entire city was centred on this spot, with all roads leading to and from it. Probably the most famous Omphalos is the one now in the museum at Delphi. In Greek history, the Delphic oracle was called Pytho, or Python the snake, and she was active for over 1,000 years, getting involved in anything from mundane day-to-day prophecies to matters of state. Nobody really has any ideas how the oracle managed to do her business. There are suggestions that volcanic vents issued hallucinogenic chemicals up into the chamber, and suggestions that sacred mushrooms were used. One strange vase, however, may give the clue. A 4th century Vulci cup shows King Aegeus before Pythia, or Themis, who holds a bowl and stares intently into it. There is no vented drug or mushroom. This is the sacred cup of the Agatha demon in another form, the prophetic snake yet again. It may also be that this was a unique way of seeing the reflection of the sky and thereby predicting events from astrological perspectives. As throughout the history of the mystical serpent, it has been associated with powers of future sight, known today as precognition. Around the decoration of this cup are the familiar spirals, movements of the sun and stars spiralling because of precession, or of the snake, and Pythia herself is seated upon the tripod, sacred to the site. Another indication that the serpent is associated strongly with prophecy is the stark fact that the words for divination in Hebrew, Arabic and Greek all mean serpent. This alone indicates that Hebrew, Arabic and Greek are following the same beliefs over a vast period of time. According to Ferguson, the 19th century writer, it was a symbol of other deities with likewise attributes. In the serpent and Shiva worship, C. Staniland Wake remarks about the Muslim saint of Upper Egypt is still thought to appear under the form of a serpent and to cure the diseases which afflict the pilgrims of his shrine. In the same book, we hear of Ramahavali, one of the 4 idols of Madagascar, whose emissaries are serpents. He is regarded as a physician and thought to expel epidemic diseases much akin to Aesculapius. As God, sacred, powerful and almighty, who kills and makes alive, who heals the sick and prevents diseases and pestilence, who can cause thunder and lightning to strike their victims or prevent their fatality, can cause rain in abundance when wanted, or can withhold it so as to ruin the crops of rice. He is also celebrated for his knowledge of the past and future, and for his capacity of discovering whatever is healed or concealed. Ramahavali has basically all the elements of the Agatha demon, the sacred serpent in one god. He is like many other serpent deities in charge of the weather. He has knowledge and wisdom, and above all, he can heal, resurrect, and disperse disease. In the epigraphic records of cures from Epidaurus, there are many methods of healing. The 17th, for instance, states, "A man had his toe healed by a serpent. He, suffering dreadfully from a malignant sore on his toe, during the daytime was taken outside by the servants of the temple, and set upon a seat. When sleep came upon him, then a snake issued from the abaton, and healed the toe with its tongue, and thereafter went back again to the abatum. Valerius Maximus also tells of a serpent which, through his arrival, he dispelled the plague for the cure of which he had been summoned. It is highly likely that these stories may relate to the healers and sages of the serpent-worshipping cults, and not to the serpent itself, although it is likely that a snake was used in many cases for the cures. In Islam, the snake is always seen as being closely associated with life. In fact, the word El-Haya, related to Eve, meaning snake, is close to El-Hayat, meaning the life-giving principle. The Prophet Muhammad is said to have spoken of the jinn, from where we get genie, as being of three kinds, one of which is a serpent. Muslims are thought to hold the opinion that Muhammad was sent not just for the people, but also for the jinn. Indeed, the white jinn are said to be formed from the irises of the serpent. The king of the jinn was Jamshid, who just happens to be famous for having a beautiful cup of elixir. A golden cup full of the elixir of life, hidden by the jinn and said to have been discovered while digging the foundations of Persepolis, which was Jamshid's capital. I know too where the genie hid the jewelled cup of their king Jamshid, with life's elixirs sparkling high. Thomas More, Paradise and the Peri. The resplendent Jam, as he was known, was the first to organise society and was one of the first legendary and possibly mythical rulers of Iran. Wine and sugar were made for the first time. He was the first to construct roads and build ships, and he established the New Year's Day festival known as Ruz on the vernal equinox, which is still celebrated in Iran. During his long reign, Jamshid received a warning that in 3 severe winters, heavy snowfalls would cover the earth and all creation would be destroyed, very much like the flood of Noah. Jamshid followed the divine order and constructed a var, which is a fortress, into which he took the best women, men, animals and plants to reproduce and replenish the earth after the snows had melted. His reign was remembered for its great prosperity, but also his pride. He became a sinner, and he was defeated and killed by the serpent king Zohak. A later king of this dynasty, Feridun, in turn killed the serpent king. Feridun is also credited with the discovery of the art of medicine and healing. It could be that Jamshid and Ki Khosrow from the 2nd millennium BC were mixed up, as Khosrow is often seen as a precursor to King Arthur, especially as he held the cup of or grail of life. The whole story of Zohak and Jamshid is the struggle between the culture of Persia and the invading serpent cult from Syria, which was seen as the evil. I had hoped to be able to balance out this one-sided history, but I could find no reference to an alternative story from the side of the serpent cult, and so we are left with a kind of anti-serpent propaganda. Snake stones. There are peculiar things known as snake stones, which were said to impart healing and good luck. Called Glenin Nadroeth, they are said to be small rings formed by snakes that join together, hiss, form a kind of bubble which they blow on, and which then hardens resembling a glass ring. Quite often these snake stones are said to be green in colour, like the Philosopher's Stone. In Cornwall, it was said that any beast bitten by a snake could be cured from the water infused by one of these snake stones. Some of these ancient bead stones were found on Hackpen Hill or Snake's Head Hill in Avebury, thought today to be for purely ornamental purposes. In India, the Brahmins convinced the Malabarians that they took these Pedra del Cobra from the actual hoods of snakes, and that this must surely be the same snake stone spoken of by Pliny, where he says of the Eastern kings, "It must be cut out of the brain of a living serpent, where it grows. For if the serpent die, the stone dissolves." The natives therefore first charm the serpent to sleep with herbs, and when he is lulled, make a sudden incision in his head and cut out the stone. Adam and Eve. Now we move on to the progenitors of the whole human race. Remarkably, I found that both were related to serpent worship from their Sumerian origins. Clemens Alexandrius said that Hivia, the root of Eve, means female serpent. If we pay special attention to the strict sense of the Hebrew, the name Hivia, aspirated, signifies a female serpent. It is connected to the same Arabic root, which means both life and serpent. The Persians even called the constellation Serpens the little Ava or Eve. In Old Akkadian, Ad signifies father, and according to C. Staniland Wake, in the origin of serpent worship, Adam was closely associated in legend with Seth, Saturn, Thoth, or Tautus, who were all associated strongly as serpents. Hercules himself, a serpent deity, is titled Sandan or Adanos. Adonis and Osiris were Azar and Adar, and even St. John's devilish Abaddon includes the term. No wonder that Abel, the son of Adam and Eve, means serpent shining, and that Cain was thought to be of serpent descent. The other and important point to note is that Adam and Eve were initially immortal, and Eve gained her wisdom via the serpent on the tree of knowledge or life. As for Cain and Abel, according to Hyde, Clark and C. Staniland Wake in Serpent and Shiva worship, Abel and Cain are names given to elder and younger brothers. Abel resolves into Ab, snake, and El, shining, and therefore is the snake god or shining snake. According to rabbinical tradition, Cain was not the son of Adam at all, but rather the son of Asmodeus, the serpent spirit, who is Harriman in Persian Zoroastrianism. Astronomy. The motion of the planets was seen as serpentine by many cultures. Calendars from Eurasia show representations of the celestial pathway with cycloid movements and serpentine features. The eclipses are shown as one serpent eating another. Similar serpent formations for the celestial pathways are shown across the world, and so it is not surprising to see the serpent represented on the ancient stone monuments of the world, which are aligned to various celestial motions such as midsummer and midwinter. In Greek legend, the father of Aesculapius, Apollo the sun god, asked his sacred crow named Corvus to go to earth and bring him a cup of fresh spring water. Corvus flew down with a chalice in order to follow his master's instructions. However, by the edge of the water grew a fig tree. The fig is thought to be a tree from the Garden of Eden. The temptation was too much for Corvus to eat the fruit, but it was not ripe, and so the bird waited. When the fruit was ripe, Corvus ate his full until the last of the figs had gone. Then he remembered why he was on the earth in the first place, and quickly filled his goblet. However, he suddenly had a thought, that he would need an excuse for taking so long. He grabbed a water snake, and together with the cup, flew back to Apollo. He told Apollo that the water snake had attacked him, but Apollo saw the tiny snake and refused to believe the bird. He punished Corvus. He gave the bird a raucous crow, and then threw Corvus, the snake, and the cup into the sky. Now we can see the cup as crater, and the snake as hydra in the stars. The snake was told to keep the cup on his back, and never to let Corvus near it. The snake becoming the protector of the cup of the water of the gods. Ophiuchus stretches from the east of the head of Hercules to Scorpio, and is partly in the Milky Way and divided by the celestial equator. Ophiuchus is the snake handler, and Serpens the snake are seen together, the handler holding the snake. The classicists see Ophiuchus as Aesculapius, the healer. To others, Ophiuchus is one of the Libyan Pacilli, who were noted for their skills in curing snake bites, and still to others is Aaron or Moses with their serpent staffs, or St. Paul and his Maltese viper. Again, the word Ophiuchus comes from Ophis for snake, and Chiro for to handle, sounding remarkably like Chiro, a supposed name for Christ, but a symbol which has much older origins. There is a legend regarding Orion and Scorpius, which involves the snake handler. Orion, in a fit of anger, swears to kill all the animals on earth. But Gaia, the Earth's goddess, is angered and sends Scorpius after him. Orion falls wounded from the sting of Scorpius, who sets in the west and rises in the east to gloat over his victim. But along comes Ophiuchus, who is above Scorpius, and tramples on him. Then, using his elixir of life, Ophiuchus restores Orion to life, and he is seen again once more in the horizon. This story is similar to the ancient Egyptian Osiris, Orion, Set, serpents, and Horus, Ophiuchus, myth. Serpents, however, is the most unusual constellation in the sky. It is the only one that is split into two parts. The two parts themselves are very telling, as they reveal a distinction between the tail or body and the head of the serpent. Serpens caput is the head of the serpent, and serpens cauda is the tail of the serpent. Even though the two are separated, they are still and uniquely classed as one. The other important point to remember is that Ophiuchus and serpents thousands of years ago were actually much larger in the sky than they are today. They had more importance to the ancients than we realise. It is a springtime constellation. It is therefore the constellation of new life. American snake tribe. This American indigenous people called the snake Anida Wehi, or supernatural. They possess influence of the rain and thunder gods over other animals and plant tribes, much like the horned man from the Gundestrup cauldron, who appears to be of the snake tribe and has ruled over animals. The most revered snake is the rattlesnake, called Utsa Nati, or he who has a bell. However, all snakes are treated with respect, fear and awe. The rattlesnake was, according to a legend, once a man, alluding to the ancient incoming serpent worshippers of antiquity. This man was transformed into a rattlesnake in order to bring salvation to the human race and save him from the power of the sun. Even the Cherokee Indians are afraid of killing the rattlesnake and will ask for pardon from the snake's ghost should they do so. The snake is said to be afraid of a plant called Silene stellata, or rattlesnake's master, which is used by medicine men to counteract venom. The teeth, skin, flesh and oil of the rattlesnake are greatly revered for their medicinal value, although pardons from the ghosts of the snakes have to be sought by the medicine man for their use. This of course leaves the secret of the preparation to the power of the priesthood, who therefore earn a living from it. There are sacred preparations which we can only see in part, as the secrecy is closely guarded. We do know that firstly the snake's head has to be cut off. The teeth are used basically as a visual device to scare the patient into believing in its power. The rattles are worn about the head, and the flesh eaten to make the warriors angry. The most important part is the lower body and the oil, which is held in great estimation by the snake tribes and the early white settlers for its effects upon joint problems. In seasons of epidemic, a roasted snake was hung in the house for the father of the family to bite off small amounts each day. He would chew it, mix it with water, and then spit it upon the other members of the family to protect them from disease. The gul gi, or black snake, was used to prevent toothache, and there is indeed a tradition that if the snake is hung on the tree for 3 days, it will bring rain, remarkably similar to the Christian tale, and even a link with Yahweh, the rain god. Circumcision. There is a peculiar practice which links the worship of the serpent with the Hebrew nation of old. Circumcision. Still today, Jewish boys are circumcised, that is, they have their foreskin removed from their penis. Why and how does this strange practice link with the serpent worship? There are wall carvings in Egypt showing circumcision being practiced. The Egyptians held the belief that when the snake shed its skin, it had undergone rebirth. It was symbolic of attaining new life and being born again. The Egyptian priest, in a mock ritual of the serpent shedding his skin, therefore removed the foreskin of the male, and so the male was born again like the snake. This practice then spread to the Semitic peoples, Arabs and Jews in later times, most probably via the emerging serpent worshippers. There is some thought but this practice may even go back to ancient Sumeria. Glaukos. O Glaukos, guiding the revolutions of innumerable years, if it be lawful, leave the abyss of the barren sea, and show me the life-sufficing plant. Show that which you tasted once with your lips, and now enjoy life incorruptible, circling with the course of time. Dionysiaca. 2 generations before the Trojan War, a child named Anthedon was born to King Minos of Crete, who had come from Scythia. This is the same Scythia from where I traced the influence of the serpent and dragon aspects into Britain during the period of King Arthur, and thereby into the legends of the Grail. Anthedon crept into a cave used for storing mead and drank himself to death. Minos sent for the seers, who informed him that whoever could describe his sacred cow the best would be able to restore the child. The problem was that the cow changed colours every 4 hours, like the periods of the day, from black of night to white of day, then red of sunset and back to black again. The only one who could describe the cow was Polydus, meaning much knowing, who said it was like a mulberry ripening, which went through similar colour changes. Polydus was the son of Coiranso, the son of Abos, who was the son of Melampus, the Egyptian. He was the most famous Iotramantis, like a shaman, in Greece, and was said to know the language of snakes. Polydus found the boy and brought him back to Minos, who refused to be satisfied, as he wanted the boy alive as promised by his seers. Polydus and the boy were locked into a beehive-shaped tomb, and were refused escape until the boy lived again. Polydus was unable to do Minos' bidding, but prayed to the gods for help. Soon, after growing accustomed to the dark, he saw a snake approaching the corpse, presumably to enact the god's will. However, terrified, Polydus killed the snake, only for a second one to emerge. This second snake saw the dead remains of the first and slithered off to fetch a twig of an herb called the flower of Zeus, which it used to bring the first snake back to life. Polydus took the hint and stole the twig, using it to resurrect the boy. A blue-grey scar emerged on the boy where the twig had touched him, and from that day forth he was known as Glaukos, meaning blue-grey. He was also known as Antitheos, or godlike, and with his fashioned serpent staff he had power over serpents until the end of time. His hair and beard turned green after becoming Glaukos, or Old Man of the Sea, and there are tales of him acting very similar to the Quinator of the Merovingians. Glaukos helped Jason build the Argo, so that he may find the Golden Fleece, and it is believed his myth came to the British shores under the guise of Gaithilos, the husband of Scotia, whom he had married after helping the pharaoh, possibly Akhenaten, in battle against the Ethiopians. The myth goes that Gaithilos, or Glaukos, travelled to Europe and brought the Druid faith with him. On the way, they visited Carthage, found a colony in Galicia, Spain, called Brigantia after the goddess Brigid, and then went on to Ireland. Gaithilos became king and Scotia his queen. The tribe took on the name Scotioi and eventually moved to Caledonia, giving their name to Scotland, or Darkland. Glaukos then moved back into the sea, and the people of Scotland still call his descendants Blue Men. All of this is a wonderful folk tale, and yet it hides the distinct belief that serpentine tribes and Egyptian-type religions did indeed come to the islands of Britain. A similar tale of snakes bringing the elixir is found in the story told by Nonnos. When a venomous serpent killed the Lydian Tylos, his sister, Moriah, requested help from a giant called Damason. This giant killed the serpent with a tree. However, the serpent's wife brought a herb known as the flower of Zeus, put it to the nostrils, and brought the dead husband back to life. Moriah then picked the same herb to bring her brother back to life. Firstly, note how the serpent is killed or sacrificed with a tree. Secondly, note how the herb is placed to the nostrils. This is the same process when using the Egyptian Ankh, the life giver, and the Ankh is made up of the symbol of the tree and the snake. It It is the symbol of ultimate treasure. The internal energy, or serpent fire, is the gift of the gods and gives all things life. It rises upon the tree of life and knowledge, which are representations of the spine. The pinnacle of this tree is the skull, and so life is drawn and given via the portals of the head. Minoan snake goddess. According to Dr. Alina Trakova-Flemey, the snake goddess of the Minoan culture is closely associated with the more general snake culture of the period. It was Sir Arthur Evans who linked this goddess with the Egyptian goddess of the Nile, Wadjet. From Evans' point of view, the snake was a form of underworld spirit with a domestic and friendly aspect. She was the mother goddess, although some doubt is now being cast upon the assertions of Evans and his archaeological validity. There are various representations of the Minoan snake goddess, mostly supposedly found in temples, although some are said to have been found amongst grave goods. The most famous, however, are the two faience snake goddesses from Knossos, from around 1600 BC. Simply, they are bare-breasted female figures holding aloft snakes. The snake is believed to emerge from Egyptian influence. This influence can be seen when we consider that Mut, or mother, in Egyptian texts, is the mother of mothers who gives birth to every god. The wonderful snake who wound herself around her father Ra and placed him upon the earth as Khons. The Minoan snake goddess symbolises rebirth, resurrection and the renewal of life, the very aspects of the serpent we've been discovering in pure form. In fact, the tale of Glaukos we have just seen is a Cretan myth. Bottom of page 26. So, there we have a few tales of the serpent in the history and mystery of the human mind. In altered states of consciousness, modern science has proven that snakes or spirals and waves are seen internally, and so this becomes a universal archetype. There are reasons for these perfectly natural shapes appearing in our unconscious or subconscious world, not least of which is because energy is a wave. These internal and religious impulses were then externalized, just as man has done so for thousands of years and still does. Art itself is a distinct method of externalizing the internal world of emotion and thought, and so the serpent was sought on the earth. It was used for medical purposes. It was worshipped as a symbol of the inner wisdom, and it was placed on the greatest of all human mental playgrounds, the sky. My reason for beginning this collection of articles and thoughts with this information is simple. I believe that the history of the world cannot be complete without the mythology of the serpent. As we can see from just this small collection of information, almost every culture on the planet has origins in the worship of the serpent, and especially the healing and enlightenment aspects of its symbolism. The greatest gods, the greatest saviours, seem to have origins in this amazing lost knowledge. Now think about this for a moment. How many history books have you read that point out these incredible tales? The answer will be relatively few. What occurred is simple. In the Victorian age, many historians discovered a lot of these links and wrote about them in isolation. Others even played down or rewrote this history because it offended their Christian delicacies. We have to remember that many of our 19th and 20th century historians were actually Christians, and they did their level best to explain anything they found to be anomalous in terms of their faith. At the end of the day, history is history, and we cannot bend it to our own belief system. Belief, faith and emotion are quite separate from truth. The facts are stark and care little for your opinion or mine. They just are. Whatever we wish to think we know, whatever we have been told to know, we must check and check again. The problem has been that a lot of this information was there, but hidden in fusty old peculiar books. It was never collated, at least it was never brought together in one place in an unbiased way. Now we are in the 21st century, and we have the opportunity to set the record straight again. Now we have this information, we must decide what to do with it. I have decided to use this, and more besides, to question the many mysteries and myths we still seem to have, and the answers that it throws up are startling. History and mythology of the snake in the world. What we saw was that history is not as we thought. We saw that underlying almost every concept was astrotheology, or the planets as gods, the sun, moon and stars. We saw that internal experiences are externalized, and that the myths and religions of the globe all revolve around a unique symbol, the serpent. It is seen in the sky, on the ground, hidden in language and glaring at us from the pages of the most profound books. I want to extend that now a little, and for us to journey around a world of symbols. By understanding what many of these symbols mean, and just how universal they are, we will be guided into this lost world of our past. We will begin with the symbol of life itself, from the world's greatest ancient civilization, Ankh.
Do not be afraid. We will not harm you. We have been waiting for you a long time, a dream.
Are you the Southern Oracle?
Yes, we are.
Then you must know what can save Fantasia.
Yes, we do.
Well, what is it? I have to know!
The Empress needs a new name.
A new name? That's all? But that's easy! I can give her any name she wants!
No one from Fantasia can do it. Only the human child can give her this new name.
A human child? Where can I find one?
You can only find one beyond the boundaries of Fantasia. If you want to save our world, you must hurry. We don't know how much longer we can withstand the nothing.